Coronation Street still at number one. 5 out of the 6 months, Coronation Street has been at number one in my rankings, and it is again for March 2022. There's a weak spot in March, but none of these other soap operas could come up and pass Coronation Street, because I still think Corey proves how character-driven storylines can be done. I'm going to start with that character-driven storyline, and then we could get to some of the other stories that maybe aren't quite as strong. But we've seen now, for going on a year, how Seb's death has affected everybody, and it's affected a lot of characters, and we've seen their character progressions as they go along, from everybody like Callie and the homelessness, and she's still getting that repercussions, and Abby losing her son, going back to drugs, being pregnant, having that one night stand. And now Abby is the one that we're seeing repercussions from that storyline, as well as Imran, who was the person Abby had that one night stand with. Abby is doing drugs again and gets left on the side of the road with because of the man giving her drugs. And she gets left while going into labor. But somebody ends up pulling over, taking her to a hospital, and so she gives birth to a baby boy, which she names Alfie, after Seb's favorite teddy bear as a child. But then becomes the whole case of if Abby should keep the baby, or if basically social workers should take the baby, because Abby isn't in the best shape. She's been doing drugs, but Imran goes to talk to her, and Imran finally puts it together that he might be the baby's father, and that's maybe why she doesn't want to keep the baby. And Toya's been trying to help Abby a lot too, which is another element to this good story, and the web of this whole story going on for a year. Toya's with Imran, and she has no idea that Imran's one night stand happened with Abby. So this has been the main story, the main good writing, showing the progression of this storyline over a year. We're still getting the aftermath from everything, and I still am engrossed by it. They've done so well with these characters. Even though Abby can get on my damn nerves, they've still done well with the characters and their progression. And so Imran was going to be the lawyer to try and make sure Abby could keep the baby, because it's his baby and he wants to keep it in his life as well. But he's still keeping this from Toya, and that's the fine line he's going to have to walk now, because he doesn't want Toya to get suspicious that he's so emotional about helping Abby that he's going to pay for somebody else to take care of the lawyer part of this thing with Abby. But he also wants to put his name on the baby's birth certificate, which could cause problems for Imran and Toya, who've been trying to adopt another kid after everything that happened with Callie. So yeah, a lot of elements to this story. I still think it's working wonderfully. Great writing from Coronation Street, and it's been showing for the past year, and that's why Coronation Street has been at the top of my ranking since I started doing this. Coronation Street was the best soap opera in 2021, and so far off to the best start in 2022 as well. All thanks to this long-term storytelling that has been pretty much all character-driven, in my opinion. We also got follow-up in a story of Gary. He killed Rick, who was a pretty bastard of a villain that had Gary being a villain as well years ago. Where Gary buried that body became the site of a construction site, and so Gary had to move the body. And when Gary tells this to Laura, who was Kelly's mother who was dying, Laura ends up taking the fall for Gary. And Kelly's been trying to take care of her mother, but Laura wants to do this because of Gary helping Kelly. And, it's kind of redemption for Laura in some ways. So I liked that twist to the storytelling to possibly get Gary off the hook. Last I watched in March, Gary still wanted to turn himself in. Now, the weakest story continued to be Lydia, because it was a weak setup. That Lydia was just upset with Adam because they dated a long time ago and he basically ghosted her. And so she came to Coronation Street to seek revenge and has basically ruined his life with Sarah and said they were having an affair, and Sarah believed her over Adam. So we got at least a climax to the story, so at least it seems to be over. Adam and Lydia were having a lot of confrontations, but they have one last confrontation where Lydia pushes him off the second story of a restaurant, and he falls and hurts himself and has to have emergency surgery to keep his eyesight. But all this leads to Lydia telling Sarah the truth, and Sarah having to go back to Adam to basically apologize. This was a weak story, I have to admit. This was Coronation's weakest story of the past year. I mean, I still found it entertaining for the most part, at least. But as far as Coronation Street goes, this was the weakest storytelling, for sure, because the setup was so weak. And Lydia seeking this much revenge over Adam for such a small reason wasn't the best. But I'm glad it already climaxed. That is smart of Coronation Street to quickly tell the story rather than drag it out. Other stories, we have Amy bringing Jacob to lunch with Steve and Tracy. You know, they haven't liked her dating a former drug dealer. And, you know, Jacob's bad side comes out when he ends up punching Simon. But Amy stands by him, and Steve ended up giving her a stupid ultimatum to basically not come home, and she kind of went along with that ultimatum and stood by Jacob. But those were the main stories I wanted to talk about. We also had Grace return to town quickly for baby Glory's birthday. She just wants more money, though, and gets more money out of Ed and Aggie. But I need a better story for Michael and Ed and all of them, because this story is run its course with Grace. Keep her out of town, we get it. She's a terrible mother and just wants money over raising her child. Yeah. But still, the main story on Corey, the A story, has been character-driven for a year now. They've pulled it off. I have to commend Coronation Street for this, because the rest of these soap operas in my rankings could never pull off a character-driven story long-term for a year. They just couldn't at this point. They don't have the talent. But Coronation Street is doing it. It stays in number one. I don't know if anything's going to pass it. Shortland Street keeps coming close just by being entertaining. But I have to continue to give credit to the writing on Corey.